let's talk about the physiology of pregnancy here. Pregnancy is not a disease state, but a really special time in the body, in a female's body. And what all changes do we see during this situation is what we are going to talk about in this lecture. It will be divided into two parts. The first part is where we will talk about the actual fertilization and the migration of the zygote, the other structures, implantation of the structure, and then the establishment of the placenta. And then in the second video, we will talk about all those specific changes that are important and how it happens during a pregnant condition. So let's begin. First, we will look at a transition from a non-pregnant state to a pregnant state. What it is we talked about a normal ovarian cycle, where on day 14, ovulation releases secondary oocyte into the fallopian tube. And the secondary oocyte will disappear within the fallopian tube because there are no sperms. And then the Graafian follicle will transition into corpus luteum. Corpus luteum starts secreting two key hormones, estrogen and progesterone. And these two hormones simply prepare the uterus for the possible pregnancy. And corpus luteum is waiting for the signal about pregnancy, but because it's a non-pregnant state, the signal is lacking. Basically, the signal appears in the form of human chorionic gonadotropin, a hormone, the first hormone released during pregnancy. Now, without the signal regarding pregnancy, corpus luteum will stop secreting these hormones by about day 25. And that's how the cycle comes to an end. Hormone levels decrease and a new cycle starts with the secretion of GnRH. All right, so with that, we want to compare a non-pregnant state to a pregnant state. All we have to do in the pregnant state is to see that there are sperms available in the fallopian tube when the secondary oocyte is also released. And then what happens is all going to be discussed in the next set of slides. Well, here is the secondary oocyte, and then it has a few cells. These are the cells we refer to as corona radiata. Okay, there is a thick coat here, zona pellucida, then corona radiata, these cells. All right, so this is how it's released into the fallopian tube from the ovary at the time of ovulation. Now, sperms are around, and these are the ones that have to make way into the oocyte. First thing they have to do is to dissolve these cells and the zona pellucida. Okay, acrosome, it has the strong, powerful enzymes are essential at this time. What exactly happens is almost hundreds of sperms gather in one specific area, and their enzymatic action would dissolve zona pellucida, and ultimately one sperm is making its way into the cytoplasm. The appearance of the sperm is a trigger for the completion of meiosis II in the secondary oocyte. So until then, meiosis 2 is stopped at metaphase 2. Now, you have to make a note here that only one sperm is allowed to enter. As soon as the sperm makes its way, the membrane closes itself off and prevents any additional sperms from reaching the cell. Once the sperm cell is in the cytoplasm, the nuclear membrane of this cell disappears, and so is the nuclear membrane of the ovum. At this point, we would call this as ovum, and the nuclear membrane disappears. The chromosomal content of the ovum, chromosomal content of the sperm will now be able to move towards each other and pair up. So these are the ones you're looking at as chromosomes. So 23 pairs of chromosomes, 23 chromosomes from the sperm nucleus and 23 chromosomes from the nucleus from the ovum. They pair up and become a complete set of chromosomes, and that's what you call as a diploid cell. And the resulting structure is what we call as a zygote. In this process of the fusion of the maternal chromosomes resulting in a zygote is what we call as fertilization. This typically happens within the fallopian tube. We will take a look here, which talks about the steps that are involved. You're looking at the oocyte here, and then it's released into the fallopian tube, and now there is the sperm making its way into the cytoplasm of the secondary oocyte. And this is like the corona radiata and the zona pellucida area that they're working on in here. So all of that happens in the fallopian tube, in different parts of the fallopian tube, away from the ovary as things continue to occur. What has happened here? The fusion of the chromosomes, pairing of the chromosomes, that's fertilization. Then the two sets of chromosomes resulting in a new cell is what we call as a zygote. Zygote begins cell division immediately, and what you see here is one cell structure becoming a two cell structure, which then becomes a 4-cell structure and the 8-cell structure. As cell divisions continue, you notice the migration of this structure more towards the uterus. The fluid secreted by the fallopian tube is important in nourishing these cells. Please note that zona pellucida is still intact in the 2-cell stage, 4-cell stage, 8-cell stage, and the 16-cell stage. And interestingly, the number of cells that are in here are all of the same kind. The series of steps, series of cell divisions you just saw is what we call as cleavage. Cleavage is cell divisions that are occurring continuously. Now, what we see is the 16-cell stage, and that's what you call as morula. This is where you have undifferentiated cells, all cells alike. Okay, so now the next stage is where you have a new structure called blastocyst. Blastocyst is the one that shows the migration of cells in different directions. I want you to see a layer of cells here, and then a group of cells in here. This group of cells here is what you call as inner cell mass. The layer of cells here is what you call as trophoblast. And there is a hollow space in the center. Okay, so this is blastocyst. You, at this point, have approximately 70 to 100 cells. And the same structure is shown in a little bit more detail here. Trophoblast cells, inner cell mass. The space that you see here is what you call as blastocele. The hollow space that's filled with a small amount of fluid. Where do you find this structure is what is interesting. It is in the junction between the fallopian tube and the uterus. At this point, it's approximately about day 6. So what happens next is zona pellucida is lost from this structure. Now the structure begins to expand. So until this point, all of these different structures that we talked about, morula, blastocyst, 2-cell stage, 4-cell stage, 8-cell stage, all these are of the same size. Why zona pellucida restricts the size from expanding. So as cell divisions continue, the cells become smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So that's around day 6. The next thing you would like to expect is implantation. This is where the blastocyst would attach to the wall of the uterus. It's shown in other slides clearly. Here is the implantation process that has just started. Let's understand the layers a little bit. This is where we have the endometrium, innermost layer in the uterus, and then this is this is endometrium, this is uterine cavity. Okay, the hollow space. Now what's happening here, myometrium should be on this side somewhere and it's not shown. Okay, endometrium. So this is partial implantation at this point. You see the inner cell mass here that's turned in towards the wall of the uterus, and the space, the empty space, is where you have just the trophoblast. All right, and now what happens is the trophoblast differentiates into 2 different layers of cells. The innermost is called cytotrophoblast. The outer one is called syncytiotrophoblast. Cytotrophoblast is the one that secretes human chorionic gonadotropin, HCG. This is the signal that keeps carpus luteum around for next several weeks. And also note that implantation is continuing here. More of the blastocyst is moved interiorly into the endometrium. So now what we see here is we do not see syncytiotrophoblast clearly yet, but assume that that's the layer that has these enzymes which would help break the tissue as it helps burrow the blastocyst deep into the endometrium. All right, so here they show a 7 to 8 week embryo where it's fully inside the endometrial layer, and now placenta will be in place, and then the umbilical cord will be formed, and all of that leads to more changes that we will talk about later. Okay, we talked about trophoblast, 1 layer of cells in the blastocyst, which soon becomes 2 layers in a cytotrophoblast, the source of HCG, outer syncytiotrophoblast. What it does is to break the cells. Let's see here, multinucleated mass without cellular boundaries, placental steroid hormone production occurs here, exposed directly to maternal blood. Okay, this is where the enzymatic action will help burrow the structure much more deeper within the endometrium. By this time here, it is now we have to assume that several days have been lost, and now you have two layers of cells. You have the syncytial trophoblast, and that is here, cytotrophoblast in here, cytotrophoblast. And so that is where you're making HCG. Now this is basically helping make space here for the blastocyst. Inner cell mass that we talked about is where you see some shuffling of cells. There are different layers of cells that have appeared. This pink layer and the blue layer are the two layers are important in the formation of the embryonic disc. All right, embryonic disc here. This layer here, this is the innermost layer called hypoblast, which will soon be referred to as endoderm. And then this blue layer here is going to be called epiblast, which will soon be called ectoderm. Okay, the outer layer in the embryonic disc. And this space here is what you call as amniotic cavity, which is filled with amniotic fluid. So here is the embryonic disc, which will soon give rise to different parts of the body, and that's how you form what we call as gastrula first, and then the embryo. All right, so now you're talking about another layer here. This is the layer that you refer to as amnion. Amnion is one of the non-embryonic layers that is shown. Yolk sac, okay, is another new addition here in this picture, in this stage. All right, so you have blastocyst cavity, that was the original blastocyst cavity that differentiates into yolk sac. You have the amniotic membrane. So what these are extra embryonic structures, and you also have the embryonic disc that consists of two layers, the hypoblast and the epiblast. You notice that here the syncytial trophoblast and its activity allowing the structure to go deeper into the endometrium. In this view, we are looking at the same two cell layers, epiblast and hypoblast. What we see here is the space around here, and this is amniotic cavity. And we also talk about the syncytial trophoblast forming a more complex arrangement between the new tissue here, and this happens to be the maternal tissue. This is endometrial lining, and that's where the new tissue, which we refer to as the embryonic tissue, and the maternal tissue. There is that interaction between these two tissues, ultimately resulting in the placenta. So in here, this is now what we call as gastrulation. What's happening is the epiblast here is now referred to as ectoderm. Hypoblast here is referred to as endoderm. There are some cells that have migrated to take a a new position here, and this layer soon becomes mesoderm. So all in all, we have 3 germ layers at this point. Endoderm, mesoderm is still being formed, and then the ectoderm. Okay, each layer gives rise to specific body structures. All right, so that's what is expanded here. So you can see this pattern. This is our endoderm. This is going to be mesoderm, and this is going to be ectoderm. Okay, so we will talk about amniotic fluid a little bit. This is the fluid you find in the amniotic cavity, and as it grows bigger, it can accommodate a lot more fluid, a total of roughly anywhere from half a liter to about a liter of amniotic fluid in a fully developed fetus. So, what are its functions? Well, it cushions the embryo and provides mechanical support, cushions, protects the embryo or the fetus. What's the difference between an embryo and a fetus? Well, when the organs are being formed through these 3 germ layers, okay, so that's when it's still an embryo. When all the structures are in place, which is usually around the end of a 2nd month, is when all there is left is the growth of these parts, and that's when you refer to it as fetus. Okay, all the parts are there. It's just the enlargement of these parts, and that is when you call it as fetus. And that's the name you keep all the way till the end of pregnancy. And once the baby is delivered, you would refer to it as a newborn. Okay, same structure, but now you call it as a newborn. Now, what is the other function of amniotic fluid? Well, it becomes an excretory structure, removes wastes from the kidneys and also the perspiration from the lungs. So those are the functions of the amniotic fluid. So let's now talk about a blood supply to the endometrium and eventually into the placenta. Well, let's understand the layers here. Endometrium is in green. This color here, brownish area, is what we call as myometrium. As you know, myometrium is much thicker and have layers of smooth muscle. Okay, so the blood supply, the main vessel that brings oxygenated blood is the uterine artery. As it makes its way into the uterine wall, it branches off and gives rise to a smaller vessel that you refer to as arcuate artery, which then branches off again, and that's when you refer to it as radial artery. And we also see the coiling of these branches, all right, and depending upon the nature of this vessel, the spiral portion is what you call a spiral artery, and the other branches that you see here are basal artery. So that is the setup we have in terms of blood supply to the uterine wall. We are looking at it because it's important for us to be able to understand a disease condition such as preeclampsia at a later point. Okay, so having understood normal blood vessel distribution within the uterine wall is what you just did. Okay, spiral arteries are shown in a bigger form here. All right, so all you want to remember is these are the arteries, okay, that would provide blood supply between the uterus and the placenta. Okay, loss of smooth muscle and elastic lamina from the vessel wall All right, so that is unique about spiral arteries. These vessels are relaxed. Okay, so loss of smooth muscle, smooth muscle contraction is not going to happen, and also elastic properties are lost. Okay, and then you're looking at this is a normal, healthy artery, and this is the bad one in the preeclampsia. And the changes that you see are going to be discussed later when we look at preeclampsia as a condition. All right, for now, let's talk about dilation of the spiral artery, which we talked about, and then provide more blood supply to the placenta. If that did not happen, you see here, failure of the physiological conversion of the spiral arteries would lead to intrauterine growth restriction as well as preeclampsia. So those are some abnormal conditions that could be caused by the abnormal spiral arteries. But in a normal, healthy situation, spiral artery supplying the uterine wall, and that is all because of special arrangement, that is the dilation of these arteries purposely to increase blood flow to the placenta. Okay, so placenta itself is shown here. It's made of a mixture of both maternal and embryonic tissue. All right, there are some blood vessels shown here. The red one that you see would be the one that supplies the fetus, and then the blue one is the one that's the maternal vessel. Yeah, it is the one. And then let's talk about the vessel here that is shown as, let me see here. This is where you're looking at these blue vessels, taking blood back to the mother. From the mother is this one, okay? Blood supply to the area, and then returning blood back to the mother is all shown in blue. All right, so what do we want to see? The formation of an umbilical cord in the placenta here. It is the interlocking of the trophoblast, the maternal tissue, and the endometrial tissue that we eventually refer to as the placenta. Okay, two major tissues contributing in the formation of placenta. Placenta is an endocrine structure. We will look at the hormones made by the placenta. Okay, we know that corpus luteum makes estrogens and progesterone, and is important in maintaining pregnancy in the early part of pregnancy. Okay, early part of pregnancy is maintained by corpus luteum by secreting estrogen and progesterone in greater amounts as pregnancy progresses. However, when placenta is in place, the amount of estrogens and progesterone that placenta can make is much greater than the source that is corpus luteum. So, because the fetus is now requiring more blood supply and more hormones are needed for maintaining other functions, we would use the hormones made by the placenta, and corpus luteum and its secretion of hormones will be in a negligible amounts, and eventually corpus luteum would regress. Okay, so about 6 weeks later, after pregnancy is in place, is when corpus luteum will gradually regress in size. Okay, so placenta has many functions. We already know that it makes a variety of hormones. We mentioned estrogens and progesterone. Add a few more. hormones to this list, which would be relaxin, you see, and a few others that are not listed here and may not be as important from the test purpose. Okay, so placenta can be a fetal cut, okay, feeding the fetus is one thing that it does, all right, and then it can be the fetal lung, okay, exchange of gases between the placenta and the fetus occurs. And then it can be referred as fetal kidney because the placenta allows the exchange of wastes between the placenta and the mother. All right, so endocrine gland, because of its ability to secrete a variety of hormones. Now, the list of hormones is what we want to talk about. We talked about HCG. HCG, or human chorionic gonadotropin, is made by trophoblast cells. At this point, placenta is not in place. It's trophoblast cells secrete human chorionic gonadotropin. This is the one that signals corpus luteum, and that's how corpus luteum can survive for a longer period of time. All right, if HCG is lacking by day 25, that's when corpus luteum regresses in a non-pregnant cycle. Okay, let's talk about other hormones. Estrogens and progesterone are also made in much larger amounts by the placenta. So you're looking at the increasing amount of estrogen, increasing amount of progesterone in the later part of pregnancy. All right, so till the 12th week or so, except for HCG, others are not as high in their levels, whereas when you jump to 20 weeks and beyond, it's like continuous hike in these two hormones. Let's talk about human chorionic gonadotropin and its role in the body in a pregnant situation. So we already know the source, that is a cytotrophoblast, and detected within 8 days of conception. So we need to think about when conception happened. Conception is when the sperm cell and the secondary oocyte come together and fertilization happens. All right. So let's talk about the days. 8 days or so since then would be, if you think day 14 or day 15 is when the fertilization happened, it would be day 22 or day 23 by the time human chorionic gonadotropin is released, and that is the one that signals corpus luteum. All right, so that's how it maintains corpus luteum beyond normal lifespan of 25 days. All right, so it also triggers the secretion of progesterone and estrogen from the corpus luteum. All right, increases the levels of this androgen, dihydroepiandrosterone. So that is the androgen that's typically made by the adrenal cortex. All right, is more in the fetal zone. All right, so this androgen is then converted into estrogens. Okay, which is used by the placenta in the production of estrogen. So DHEA production by the adrenal cortex is increased, which is utilized by the placenta to make new estrogens. All right, increased testosterone production in a male fetus. That's the connection between HCG and testosterone in a male fetus. Okay, HCG receptors are present in the endometrium and myometrium, and decreased contractions produced by oxytocin. Okay, contractions are reduced. Okay, decreased amount of oxytocin which causes less contraction of the uterus. That means less chance of this fetus being ejected from the placenta. So think about a lot of contraction in the uterus and then the escape of this structure, and then that would be the end of that pregnancy. But in the presence of HCG, what happens is you would control the amount of oxytocin and control the level of contraction, meaning less contraction and more relaxation. It also is supposed to be an immunosuppressant. Okay, doesn't allow the immune system to target this newly developing fetal structure. Okay, block the exposure of this embryo or fetus from the immune system. And other hormones that we need to talk about are progesterone and estrogens. All right, so we already know that progesterone is a maternal hormone, an important one in the preparation of the corpus luteum to receive this blastocyst. Okay, maintains decidual lining of uterus to provide nutrition for fetus. Decidual lining is actually the portion of the maternal tissue that participates in the building of a placenta. Okay, decidua is the maternal part of the placenta. All right, so now let's move on to talk about where this hormone comes from. 90% is all from the placenta. And it's a major substrate for cortisol and aldosterone by the fetal fetal adrenal gland. Okay, so now we'll talk about its other functions, that is decreased uterine contractions and decreased prostaglandin production, decreased sensitivity to oxytocin. So all of these are important in preventing too many contractions, which may simply make the newly implanted structure to be out of the uterine wall. Now the last one is estrogens. Okay, estrogens made by the corpus luteum in the beginning, all right, and up to about 5 to 6 weeks, and that is stimulated by human chorionic gonadotropin. Then placenta takes over. Placenta starts making estrogen a little later on, and again it's from this androgen dehydroepiandrosterone that is from the fetus. Okay, so estrogens also increase uterine blood flow. Estriol is excreted in urine, an index of fetal well-being. Okay, estriol is one type of estrogen that leaks into urine, and one can measure estriol to figure out what's going on in the pregnant body. All right, growth and estrogen go together. Here you're talking about increased continuous growth of uterine myometrium, increased growth of the ductal tissue of the breast. So all these accessory structures are allowed to grow further in the presence of estrogens, along with relaxin, which is another hormone made by the placenta. Except for along with relaxin, estrogens will soften the bones. All right, maternal pelvic expansion of uterus. All right, so now we will stop here and let's look at the specific changes that occur in a woman's body when she's pregnant. Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you soon.